Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. On this video, I'm talking about the full moon in Sagittarius on the 14th of June. And if you're keen on knowing exactly when the full moon occurs, it's going to be at 10:53 UTC, which is GMT in old money, and you can make your adjustment accordingly for wherever you are in the world. Now, this full moon is a supermoon because it's the moon is closer to the Earth, so it will loom large when you can see it. And of course, you'll be seeing the full moon building for a couple of days before that. So you'll see it at some point in the night sky. But in point of fact, if you want to know exactly when it is, I have to say, 10:53 UTC. So it's also what's known as a blood moon. And so there will be, in some places, it rather depends where you are on Earth, but you should see a kind of reddish hue to that full moon. And of course, it really suits its title because this is known as a strawberry moon. And it denotes the time, of course, when in the Northern Hemisphere, we're eating those delicious fruits. Now, I'm not quite so sure the astrology is going to be as sweet as a strawberry, but we'll certainly be eating strawberries at the time. So let me talk a little bit about the actual idea of the sun in Gemini and the moon in Sagittarius, because that's what a full moon is. If there is a general kind of meaning to this full moon, it can be wrapped up in a nutshell: travel and communications, because both these signs have to do with, in Sagittarius's case, widening horizons, and in Gemini's case, just communication, period. In fact, I often think when I look at these two signs, and I have to talk about them in this way, that Gemini is the journalist and Sagittarius is the novelist. So with Sagittarius, we're looking at much wider horizons, sort of themes and interests that can be a little esoteric, certainly spiritual, the pursuit of kind of extra knowledge, if you like. Whereas with Gemini, we're on the fact trail. We want to know what's going on in the here and now, right now, with some very specific facts and figures. So when we get a full moon on this axis, we have some kind of build-up in the whole of the communications travel kind of network. And there's a little bit more to this story than what I'm telling you. And we'll go into that when we start looking at the actual horoscope of what else is around that particular time. Because, the background to a full moon or to a new moon is all important. It shows you what's going on at the time, and that will influence the whole effects of a full moon or indeed a new moon. Now, full moons, all full moons, have the theme of closure and completion about them. And I always say that the word I like most about a new moon is conclusion, because a conclusion is both an ending, it's done, but it's also the idea that we've reached conclusions, which means we're sort of reaching understandings, and that it can mean a whole different thing. And that's what that full moon is all about. Now, in terms of communications and travel, we're looking at journeys in terms of knowledge and information, experience, and also in terms of miles. And of course, when we think about this period, especially in the Northern Hemisphere, people are going on holiday. This is really not the beginning. We're already started the whole holiday season a couple of weeks ago. But you can imagine when we look at full moons and we think about the stress that often occurs at full moons. Think again about the whole idea of the way the moon has an influence over the tides of the oceans. The full moon has an influence over our emotional tides. So we tend to be more emotional around the time of a new moon. So if things are a little bit difficult, then we tend to overreact to them. And of course, if things are over the moon, wonderful, then we tend to overreact, but perhaps in a much happier way. But that's always worth bearing in mind. When you see the full moon in the night sky, or you just see the full moon, or you know it's there, remember, small incidents are much more likely to become major incidents on a full moon. So even if you start the day off quite well, full moon day, you get a parking ticket, someone sends you a message and you really don't like what's going on, then you're much more likely to be affected by the event at that particular time. Now, there's also a little bit more to this full moon, as you'll see when we put it under the horoscope telescope, if you like. That's not a good word, is it? We have a look at it in the spotlight of the real horoscope. So I'm going to do that right now. As you'll see from this horoscope, as I've got the sun just above the horizon and the moon just below the horizon. And effectively, if you live in Oklahoma, because this is where I've set this for, or you're in that time zone in North America, you won't actually see the full moon at its peak because, of course, as we can see from this, the full moon is below the horizon. So you won't be able to see it as such at exactitude, but you will have seen it the night before or even during the course of that of the night, the following night. But what I'm really interested in looking at in this horoscope is the position of Neptune. Now that's that trident symbol just up there at the very top of the chart there. Not exactly on the midheaven, but sort of getting up there. Now, why is Neptune significant here? Well, if you look at the degree numbers there, you can see Neptune at 25 degrees of Pisces, and you see the full moon, the sun at 23.5 and the moon at 23.5. So they're in alignment. They're in what we call a T-square, or we might like to look at the fact that Neptune is just at the apex of that full moon. Now, Neptune blurs the lines of things. Nothing is as clear and concise as it should be. Now, of course, when we're living in a blurry world, we can be living in a blurry world because we're 10 foot off the ground with happiness. We're in romance heaven. Something absolutely wonderful has happened, and we're just really out there, not quite connected with the real world. So it doesn't have to be bad. But it's also a time when things are very unclear and we're likely to make misunderstandings. We're likely to not get someone's drift, to take something for not what it really is. We're likely to lose the plot, lose our way, and all sorts of other things that apply to being unable to see things really, really clearly. Now, if we want to look at this in the sense of what's going on in the world at this time. And we would look, I've already mentioned the idea that lots of people go on holidays. It's holiday season in the Northern Hemisphere. And you just imagine with all the problems that we've had with travel, especially air travel, with long queues going through security, you could see there could be some real problems, especially with air travel around the time of this full moon. But we can also be looking at sea travel as well. Why? Because Neptune is in the picture here. And Neptune is, of course, the lord of the ocean. So we get the idea there's some watery issues here. So if you are traveling at this time, even if you're not traveling in the Northern Hemisphere, you can still be affected by problems connected with travel in, elsewhere in the world. So it's very wise to leave a little bit longer for your journeys and to do a lot of fact checking. Now, of course, Mercury turned direct about a week before this full moon. And one of the things about Mercury turning direct after it's been retrograde for a while is that things that were concealed start to be revealed. And that sometimes means that things you didn't know were happening are happening, and that can be a bit of a problem because you're then trying to unravel something and deal with something that you should have known about before. So that's one of the things that I think playing into this full moon, squaring Neptune, is that we're all globally dealing with things we never knew were in the process of becoming or had happened. So there's an enormous amount of confusion about certain events in certain places in the world. Now, of course, when we think about what Neptune stands for, not only the Lord of the oceans, but Neptune has a lot to do with health, with medicine, with pharmaceuticals. It has to do with health services. It has to do with social services. And Neptune also rules things to do with gas and things to do with chemicals. And of course, when we think about all the things going on potentially at this time, especially as we know there's been a lot of difficulties with the prices of gas and the withholding of gas and electricity because of the Russia-Ukraine situation, you can imagine that at this time of the full moon, there could be some other crises related to gas and chemicals and all those kind of things, oil as well. Now, I mentioned the social services here, and I also mentioned the health service. And one of the other things we've been battling with this year is a cost of living crisis all over the world. Prices have risen, and you could see them coming to a peak probably at this time. And so the idea of Neptune and suffering is another big theme. So we may be made much more aware of people suffering in this climate at this time. So aside from, information reaching us, there's also the idea that people will be wanting their voice to be heard about their impossible situations. So we could get all sorts of things to do with governments and protests and all of it linked to the idea of money and lack of money. And while we're on the subject of money too, there could be monetary crises, financial crises at this time globally, or just in different parts of the world. And if we go back, about a month or so, around the time of the total lunar eclipse, what was going on there? But this complete crisis in the cryptocurrency market. We had two stable coins, crashing at this time, and, it affected the whole of the cryptocurrency market. So we take this 4 weeks on, and maybe we've got a continuation located within the cryptocurrency market, or we may have other markets, and economies going through a real crisis at this time. And what it's probably fanned by, given that this full moon, sun in Gemini, moon in Sagittarius, is fake news, is all sorts of other news and information that's sort of gathering people's emotions up. And of course, that does affect how, money markets work, and also, of course, our own situation in regard to the economy. So if we move away from the actual day of the full moon for a moment and its connection to Neptune, we're also looking at a few other factors in this period of time. On the 4th of June, roughly 10 days before the full moon, Saturn turned stationary retrograde. So it's now beginning its journey back through the sign of Aquarius, going over where it's already been. So there are a lot of things now beginning to be rediscovered and all sorts of realizations gradually being made. Now, I talked about this at large on my previous video, which was the new moon in Gemini. And so if you want a little bit more information about Saturn's retrograde move and also the whole idea of Saturn's shadow cycle, then go visit that one. But it's something we need to take into consideration at the time, just leading up to the full moon, that a lot of things, remember I talked about information coming to light because Mercury has just become direct. Well, we get a similar thing with Saturn. What's going on here? Things we thought were settled. No, they're not. Things are now shrouded in uncertainty because of Saturn's backward trek. We also need to look at, if you can see here, Venus close to Uranus, the television aerial there, we can see in the sign of Taurus on the kind of 11 o'clock position in our horoscope here. And we see that just prior to the full moon, in fact, we're talking about the 11th of June, the weekend of the 11th, 12th, Venus was conjunct Uranus, and the day after the moon opposed that. So we've got quite a volatile weekend. Now, often with Venus-Uranus, we get just what I've been talking about, financial upsets. We also get romantic upsets. We can get all sorts of things. You know, Uranus upsets the apple cart. Sometimes, you know, we need to see things in a new way, which I'm going to be talking about shortly as well. But it's also this idea of things we didn't know about coming to light. So we're looking at, especially over that weekend, if you've got special occasions set in for that weekend of the 11th, 12th of June, leave a little room for kind of unexpected developments. And then when you meet them, they'll just be easy. They don't have to upset the whole thing. And in fact, often the things that are changed or the upsets that happen turn out to be the reason it's so memorable in a good way. And remember also with Uranus, we're looking to take steps in a new direction. Some things have got stale. Some things have got stuck. You know, it's time for a whole new look. The day before the full moon, the 13th, Monday the 13th, Mercury heads into Gemini. So, as I often say, if Mercury has come into your sign, you've got the power of speech. And if you have been feeling as though you haven't really got a grip on certain things, then you don't, you know, your voice isn't being heard, you're now beginning a season where your voice can be heard. The Sun-Neptune conjunction, a Sun-Neptune square, is exact on the 16th of June, but of course it will be in play right the way from Friday, really the 10th of June, if not a little bit before that. And of course it's particularly strong if you're a member of the mutable signs. That means you're a Gemini, a Sagittarius, a Pisces, or a Virgo, and you have planets around 23, 25 degrees of those signs. And we can look at birthdays perhaps around the middle of your month if you belong to those signs. And so what you need to be really, really careful about is, you know, getting the facts right. It's very simple. Seeing is not always believing. You have to do fact checks and figure checks and blink several times before you can really see what's going on. And the advice I'm going to give you, if you feel confused at this time, or you are in that group of signs I've just talked about, then if you don't know what to do nothing. Because it's pointless making another mistake because you can't really see what it is that you're doing. Finally, before I come back to me, I want to look at this chart and see Saturn there at 25 degrees of Aquarius. Talked about its retrograde status now. But as Venus moves forward, it comes to square Saturn, which it does on the 18th. Now, it gives me an opportunity, if we just look at that Venus-Saturn square, which is the last of the details I want to look at on this horoscope. So come back to me and I can talk to you face to face. You know, we often think that Saturn is the bogey, is the difficult planet. And yes, it is a difficult planet because we have to face reality with Saturn, and we have to take medicine that we don't like, but it's medicine that does us good. But one of the things I think in particular we need to look at with Venus and Saturn particularly, Venus conjunct Saturn, Venus opposing Saturn, Venus square Saturn, is that there is a certain dignity in this aspect. And, you know, when we're talking about relationships aren't just sweetness and light and every day is a joyous day. No, we have to live with our relationships in the real world. And without Saturn, we have no glue, no structure in a relationship. So a Venus-Saturn aspect, either in a relationship when we're looking at synastry, or a transiting Saturn to Venus, or a Venus-Saturn square in this case, can become a time when we strengthen a relationship. We may formalize it, solemnize it by getting married or moving in together or forming a partnership in business that requires legal steps and signatures on paper. And a Venus-Saturn square in this instance is a good thing. So don't get too kind of caught up in the idea, oh dear, we've got a Venus-Saturn square. That means, we won't be happy, things won't go right. No, quite the reverse. In certain circumstances, there is a dignity and a great strength to a Venus-Saturn aspect. But of course, having this aspect at the same time as that full moon squaring Neptune does one of two things. Either it's a counterbalance to all that fuzzy Neptunian, don't know what's going on experience, so that it brings some reality and solidity into the picture. Or we get this kind of feeling at this time that even if we can't be 100% sure what the reality is, we're not feeling very happy about the things that are going on. Now, of course, having talked about this full moon, having talked about the idea of closure and completion, and then a whole string of things that can happen on a full moon, especially with travel and all of that, it can appear as though there's nothing good to say about a full moon. Well, of course, you get happy endings as well as sad endings. We get good conclusions as well as not so good conclusions. But the thing to remember with a full moon is that the sun is opposite the moon. It's at the opposite side of the zodiac. So we're looking at a polarity. And so with a polarity, what is there about a polarity? It's not just about two very separate and different kind of experiences and themes. Within any polarity, there is the prospect of unity. That's why full moons are also considered to be a good time to marry or to make a commitment or to do something that's very final, because in that polarity is the notion of unity. And I think that's just a really, really good thing to think about, especially with this full moon, because yes, I know I've talked about all sorts of things that maybe aren't quite so easy to deal with at this particular time. So now let me go on with my journey through the zodiac in terms of what this full moon means to you. Well, of course, Sagittarius, this is a full moon in your sign. And one of the things this does is take you right back 6 months to the new moon in your sign on the 4th of December. So the time period in December is related to what's going on at this period of the full moon in Sagittarius. Now, that new moon on the 4th of December was a solar eclipse, so it really packed a powerful punch. So you may be able to remember what happened around that period. And remember, we always give a couple of weeks, because as the new moon moves to full, it's waxing, that's 2 weeks. And then as the full moon goes back and wanes towards new moon, that's another 2 weeks. So let's think about that 2-week period, around the new moon of the 4th of December. What sort of things were in play there? What changes occurred? What decisions were made? Because yes, they will have something to do with what's going on around this full moon. And of course, it's the relationship axis. The moon is in your sign, Sagittarius, the sun in Gemini in the 7th house. So we're looking at the completion of a cycle. So it's time for a relationship checkup. Perhaps your relationship, whether it's a business relationship or a romantic relationship, is up for review. Is it going from strength to strength and you want to continue on in this vein, make it even more of a commitment? Or are you beginning to think, you know what? I think we've gone as far as we can. So it becomes both a time to sign on the dotted line and also to tear up contracts. Now, the same thing applies to Gemini, because the sun is in your sign, Gemini, and the moon is in your opposite sign and the 7th house. And of course, this applies to if you've got Gemini rising. This full moon will be in the 7th house. So we're in relationship land again. And it is a time of conclusions. You're reaching conclusions about one or more relationships in your life. And it can be a time of fulfillment, a time of plenty, of abundance, where you feel really full of emotion because, you're in a terrific relationship. Or it can be a time when you feel the lack of a relationship. Why am I alone? Why don't I have someone in my life? So you're going to feel it more at the time of this full moon. And of course, if there's anything wrong with a relationship, and it can be even a family relationship or a friendship, a working relationship, if there's anything wrong with it, you're likely to be feeling it at this full moon. And, we looked at this full moon squaring Neptune and saying, it could be a very confusing period. And if you are feeling confused about a relationship, feel confused. It's all right to be confused. Nobody knows all the time what they want, what they think is right. No, dare to be confused. At a certain time, you will not be confused any longer. So there's no point making a decision when you're unsure about it. So if we come to Pisces now, then the moon itself is in the 10th house and the sun is in the 4th house. So we're on this axis of life direction. And I always talk about getting the balance of life right if you've got this polarity, the balance between work and your life out, there in the world, you as an entity that everyone else can see and participate in socially, work-wise, you name it, that's you outside. But then there's the private you, the you that's at home, but has a home and a family and a place of sanctuary, you hope, which is your home base. So there needs to be a balance between these two areas of life. One can't be all there and the other not functioning at all. They need to be in balance. Now, full moon, of course, closes a cycle. So we could be looking at the end of a job. We could be looking at the end of a chapter for family life. It may be that you're ready to move to a new place, or that there are endings within the family. And therefore, at the time of the next kind of new moon, there'll be a new beginning, and you will be making a new beginning or opening a new chapter thereafter. But for now, it's about that fullness of emotion, the sense of an ending. And it can be in either of those two areas, related to career, could be related to your home and family. But I think too, with Neptune in tow, Pisces, especially as Neptune is your ruling planet, there is either an aura of unreality about things going on at this time. You may even be tempted to say, oh, this feels unreal. And it's certainly not necessarily the time to assume that things are the way they're always going to be. Leave a little bit of room to maneuver. Now, your opposite sign, Virgo, is the other way around. So we're looking at the sun in the 10th house. So throughout this period, while the sun is in Gemini, so we're looking at the period from about the 21st of May to about the 21st of June, the sun is illuminating your out in the world place. So this can be career, but it can also be the kind of role you play in life, and that can vary. We're all daughters or sons or parents, or we're all these roles, aren't we? So this idea is that there's an ending coming here. And does it mean that kids are off to university, so you're no longer one of those hands-on parents? Does it mean that you're thinking about, my job is taking too much of my time, or I'm spending too much time on things that don't really matter to me in my heart. I'm not connected to my home base, my family, and I'm really not happy about this. So, as I said, it's about getting the balance right, and it's a prime opportunity to do that. But again, yeah, it could be the end of a job, and it could be the end of a period of time in a particular place. And I think it's also important when we think about families as well. Most families are dysfunctional, I have to tell you. I mean, we aim to all of us have happy families, but that's not always the way it is. But even within the happiest of families, there are times when there's division and upset. And I think this full moon is saying, let's bring an end to family upsets. Let's, put them behind us and move on. So if we come to my next group of signs, and so we're going to look at Libra, we're in the cardinal family now. Then the moon is in the 3rd house, the sun in the 9th house. So we really are in travel territory here. So maybe you are off about to make a really important journey in terms of miles. So you're actually going on a long journey, or maybe you've just come back. And of course, when we're away from our normal, surroundings, we tend to think differently about things. And I think it's like Christmas, isn't it? Or, times when we're not in our usual routine. A lot of things get discussed and we get a new view on our life. So it may be that while you've been away, you've had some thoughts about things. And so that at this full moon, you want to implement some of those ideas and you want changes. Or it may be that as you come back from being away, there are things that now need to be resolved. You've been away and you haven't been able to resolve them. So there could even be a little bit of a crisis here of things that you have either not understood, or maybe they've been left. You didn't know what was happening. So you've got to really kind of run around trying to, make things all right, which are perhaps not being quite all right. But we also get this idea of the end of a journey in a different way. We have a journey in experience. We have a journey in a relationship. So even though these aren't the relationship houses involved, it can still mean, you've come to the end of a particular journey in a relationship. And is it time to abandon ship with that Neptune influence? Or is it time to say, you know what? I'm allowed to feel confused about this, and I'm just going to give it time. And remember always, especially on that full moon day and throughout the week of the full moon, check your information before you reach a judgment. Now, it's the same here with Aries, but this time we're looking at the moon itself in the 9th house, and we're looking at the sun in the 3rd house. So at the moment, you're doing a lot of learning. Maybe that's true. Maybe you're on a course. So there's a lot of things you're acquiring knowledge about. Or it may be you're doing a lot of talking or negotiating, or you're making a lot of plans, and maybe you need to get into, some facts and figures. Maybe there's a lot of bureaucracy you have to get through at this time. And of course, put a full moon in there and you get all sorts of red tape strangling what you want to do. But red tape is important. You can't snip it. It really has to be dealt with. So if you are dealing with something that requires red tape, get a good mindset about it and just get down and do it, because you can be caught up, mistakes can be made because of the red tape situation. It's also very important, I think, to deal with things in the here and now. Now, that may mean your neighborhood, so things related to where you live and how you operate, but it can also mean the here and now. We're not talking airy-fairy stuff. We've really got to stick to the facts of a situation and not get, all over the place because we're not keeping to what the facts are. And I think this will help you a lot at the full moon time. And of course, sometimes you get to complete something. In other words, you may have done a test or something, and so that full moon brings in the results, whether it's a rich harvest and you're happy with the results, or it means you have to go back to the drawing board. It's going to be different from Aries to Aries, but endings, beginnings, that's always a theme we're looking at with the new and full moon cycle. So if we come now to Cancer, we've got the full moon itself in the 6th house, and we've got the sun at the moment in the 12th house. And, while the sun is moving through the 12th house, which it has been since the 21st of May, and will continue on through there until it comes into your sign on the 21st of June, you're living in a blurry world anyway. I always say, take care of your health, look after your spiritual, mental, and emotional well-being. Don't push it. It's time to recharge the batteries. So technically, we're in a period where you should be taking a break. You should be making sure you're not over cramming your schedule, whether with work or social activities. Take care, take it gently. And of course, at the time of a full moon, we're often, where the weaknesses are in ourselves is illuminated. And if we apply this to health in particular, if we've been pushing our physical health, our mental health, our emotional health, we're going to find out about it at the full moon. And as I say, this is something you're looking at before the full moon. So my words here should be taken, as a real heads up, so that, the week before that full moon, start thinking about putting in some early nights, paying attention to, anything that doesn't seem to be working too well. Deal with it so that when we get that full moon, it can be a time of illumination. Remember, the 12th house is the house of the unconscious mind. It's our most spiritual realm. It's where we seek transcendence. So this full moon offers us, if you're a Cancer, the opportunity to transcend your situation in a good way. If we come now to Capricorn, then we're looking at the moon in the 12th house and the sun in the 6th house. So at this time, while the sun is moving through the 6th house, there are a lot of things that need kind of sorting. The 6th house is a great area. It's where I say you do the work of life. And when we think about our everyday circumstances, how our life runs is often bound together by our routine. The time we get up, the time we go to work, we take the kids to school, so we have a kind of structure to our daily lives. But that structure can be a real nuisance because it can prevent us from doing the things that really would give our life meaning and purpose. And so within the 6th house, we have to find meaning and purpose. And this full moon is going to illuminate that. I mean, maybe you'll get that moment of epiphanies, so that you realize, goodness, I'm wasting my time here. This is what I need to be doing. This is where I need to go. This is what my time needs to be spent at. But of course, we're looking in the same way as we did with the Cancer, Capricorn, 6/12 axis. We're looking at health, because that's a system too. How is your health system? Maybe we were already at a time when you've got appointments booked for dental work or other kinds of physical work. But of course, the full moon will illuminate those things that really need to be addressed. So whatever comes up around this time in the way of an epiphany, but let's talk specifically about health and well-being, address it. This is showing areas of your life that need to be balanced. Remember, I've talked about the balance of life with other signs. Well, this is the balance of your life in terms of health and well-being, purpose and meaning in life. So it's really, often people think the 6th house and the 12th house, what do those houses do? What is that? But it's crucial. It's where, as I said, purpose and meaning lie, where we transcend. Very important. So if we come now to our final group and we're looking at the fixed signs, we start with Taurus, and that full moon occurs in the 8th house. So the sun is in the 2nd house and the moon is in the 8th house. So what we get here is things to do with self-worth, the things to do with value in life. We have a value. Ourselves have a value. You, Taurus, who are you? What do you consider to be your assets? Of course, often we think about assets in terms of we own a house, we have X amount of money in the bank, we get this amount of money for the work we do. We think of it in those terms, self-worth in terms of what we have financially, materially. And this is very important. And with this full moon on this axis of material worth, but it's also an axis of self-worth in terms of who you are. So there's a bit of a crisis here. Now, is this crisis because you feel undervalued? Are people not treating you as you would like? Well, this is an opportunity to think, why is that? Why am I not getting treated as I deserved? Is it that you're not standing up and saying what matters to you and what you believe you deserve? That may be the case. Is it perhaps that somewhere deep down, you're not really very happy with yourself? Now, what is it that you're not happy about? And that's transmitting itself to other people, and they're picking that up, and they're not treating you as you would like to be deserved. So it's something you've got to fix. And this full moon offers you that opportunity to really figure out what it is that isn't working for you and why you're feeling undervalued by partners in particular, but people in general. And it applies also to money. And maybe at this time, you need to balance the accounts and you need to make sure that everything balances in your favor. And if your finances are out of whack, it's time to fix them. And it can be a time of settlements and a time of even, redundancy settlements, divorce settlements, but it can also be inheritances or money coming to you from not your own work or your own effort, it's actually coming to you. So that means that you can sign on the dotted line and get agreements in place. So there are some quite good things about a full moon on this axis. Now, Scorpio, it's the same for you as well, but it's kind of different, isn't it? We've got the moon in the 2nd house and we've got the sun in the 8th house. But a lot of those issues over self-worth and what you have in the bank and are your finances out of whack and what now needs to be completed, they're all applicable to you too, subtly different though. Because here we're really a little bit more in that area of intimacy. Now, of course, when we feel full of value, I think it's easier for us to share ourselves. And we really do open ourselves up in an intimate relationship. And, we have to be confident to do that. And we have to trust the person with whom we are intimate. So this is all about relationships, intimate relationships as well. And whether this is a satisfying experience for you or whether it's anything but satisfying. There are all sorts of inadequacies and problems and upsets in this whole area of intimacy. But that's where that full moon is. It's to show you that this needs resolution. This needs dealing with, because it's only when I think we feel we can be open to another person and that person accepts us for absolutely who we are, that we find true intimacy and trust. And this intimacy issue this full moon is offering you that opportunity, but it may have to bring you to a crisis first. And the same really with finances as well. Is this a cash flow crisis? Is it a financial reckoning? Or is it that things are now completed? You know, your mortgage is done, you've paid off. Is it that you've signed all the paperwork and so all your financial ducks are in a row? That's where this full moon is aimed at, 2nd, 8th axis. Last two signs, we come to Leo. And the moon itself is in the 5th house. And the 5th house is very much what I call the me area of the chart. It is your creative center. And when we're creatively involved with things, we really feel fulfilled. And it's the area of the heart. And this is where romance comes in as well. And as I think I said on one of my other videos, this idea of love affairs having to do with creativity is quite simple, because in order to procreate and to reproduce ourselves, we need to have a love affair going. Get my drift. But it's also, I think, about the 5th house, where we've got this full moon in the 5th house, the end of a gestation period. So something has been in preparation for a while, and it's now either done and dusted, or it's ready to be delivered. And this idea of gestation and pregnancy, again, is a good one, because there are 9 months of gestation with a delivery at the end of it. But there are lots of things that can have been gestating for a period of time. You can have a love affair that's been developing. So is it now a full-blown relationship, or is it done its time? So we can have this sense of crisis or endings and conclusions that are linked to love affairs. We're also looking at projects, creative projects. If you put in all the infrastructure, it's now ready for the off. Yes, maybe you have. And that full moon is saying, how great, I've completed it and I feel terrific. It can also apply to one's offspring, because this is the area of offspring. So does it mean that something in regard to your children or grandchildren is coming to a conclusion? Are they coming to the end of secondary education or primary education, or they're ready to go to university? Or have they themselves been, procreating? And so that's going to change for you becoming a grandparent, maybe for the first time, or maybe for the second or third time. So we have this creative, procreative theme with this moon. And of course, even though, we think about the 5th house as being very me, and what we produce as a whole, when you think about reproduction, you need another person, which of course takes us to the 11th house, where we deal with collaboration. So that's another important theme for you, Leo, at the moment, is the importance of collaboration. And that full moon is going to show you how important it is, whether it's not working at all, you in a collaboration, or that now that's what you need to do more of, more collaboration, more teamwork. So we come to the last sign, Aquarius, which of course is the very opposite of that. Because for you, the moon is in the 11th house, the sun is in the 5th house. So ever since the end of May, the sun has been moving through the 5th house, and all those things about creativity apply to you in a big way. And the cycle of a month, getting personally involved with things, is actually quite a physical area of the chart. So we do a lot of sport and entertaining and pleasurable activities, and really letting our hair down and enjoying ourselves. And so we've got our inner child is being, brought into the proceedings. We're finding the joy of play. And I think this is terribly important while the sun moves through the 5th house, Aquarius, that you play. And you play in a way. Remember playing when you were little? How wonderful it felt to use your imagination and to get caught up in something that wasn't necessarily, to do with work or with material things. It was to do with the joy of play, and bringing that into life is so important. Now, it may also be quite a competitive time for you. Maybe you are involved in competitive sports, or maybe you find you feel you're in competition with people. Nothing wrong with that. We all feel that from time to time. Or maybe you are up for something and in competition with others. So this full moon will either give you a conclusion, so you know whether you won or not, you get a result, or it may sort of imply that this sense of competition is really distorting, what you enjoy doing. And that's not a good thing. We're also looking at enterprise and collaborations here as well. So it could mean it's the end of a collaboration. Maybe it's just part of the work you do. You've been working with a team and a project's finished and it's time to get on with something new. But it could be more than that. You're with a startup company, or you've got some other kind of enterprise. And this full moon is saying, you know what? That's it. That's really the end of it. And you go on to new pastures after that. And I think too, one last thing about this 11th, 5th axis that this full moon is straddling, it's really that line between what's important for you personally and what's part of a bigger picture. It's the small self versus a higher self. So this might also be a time when you feel, I want to get involved in a humanitarian way. I want to have more to the things I do than that's just at its face value. And that might be another thing to put in your thinking cap for this particular full moon. So that brings me to the end of my journey through the 12 houses and the 12 signs of the zodiac with this full moon. And it brings me to my conclusion. And I was thinking a lot about this recently, as always, why I talk about things or reach this conclusion is because what's relevant to my work, what I'm dealing with my clients, and also, of course, what I'm dealing with in my everyday life. And what I want to talk about is that changing your mind isn't a weakness. It can be a strength. And I'm going to look at this in two ways. When I say changing your mind, we're not talking about flip-flopping all the time. Somebody that says, oh, I'll do that on Tuesday. No, I won't. I'll do it on Wednesday. Oh, you know what? I don't want to do it at all. Now, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when we reach a decision about someone, we have an opinion and we feel that's our opinion about this matter and that's it. And we all do that. We all make opinions, form opinions. We all, that's what we believe, that's what we think. But, circumstances can change things. Our feelings can change things. People can change. Therefore, that affects our opinion. And if we decide, well, this was the opinion we had and I'm never going to change it, that's just the way I am, I'm true to my opinions, I stick by what I said, well, things have changed. It's no point sticking where you were, in which case it becomes a strength to change your mind and accept things have changed. Now, on top of that we get this idea of changing your mindset, which is linked to this, because changing your mindset changes everything. It changes outcomes. If we can look at a situation from a different perspective, walk a mile in someone else's shoes, all those kind of cliches. But it's so true, because when we see something in a different way, we see all ways for different outcomes. Change is growth. Growth is change. We can't grow if we don't change. So coming back to my original idea, it's not just changing your mind can be a strength. It's changing your mindset is a strength. And I think that's something we all need to think about. I don't want to necessarily draw references to what's going on in the world, but Imagine if Putin changed his mindset. So, food for thought, my friends. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. And I look forward to speaking again to you in a couple of weeks' time. Bye for now.